Hey friends, welcome back to the next video, and now let's actually explore a little bit more the scenario analysis in DAX. Now before I do that, see that I have renamed the sheet as Visual Insights, and I also press Ctrl S or click on the Save button here just to save my Power BI file. And you should always do that, otherwise if Power BI crashes for whatever reason, then you lose your work, and that should not be the case. So as soon as you've done this, then click on the plus symbol to create a new page. Now, for the scenario analysis, we already have taken a look at the modeling view, right? And there is a so-called what-if parameter. Remember, we did this when we did the sales ranking. So now we would like to apply this to do a scenario analysis, considering the amount of sales we have, as also the demand. Now, of course, to get some insights, what kind of price change would have, what kind of impact this would have on the demand, for instance, and also what's actually the development of, for instance, the whole world economy. This is something you have to, of course, ask the right people in your organization, right? Or have to do some kind of guessing here. But in our case, let's do it simple. So I'm using a new parameter here to create my analysis, and I name this simply price change or price adjustment, whatever you want to call it. So price change. And then I say this data type here should not be a whole number, it should be actually a decimal number. Now here for the minimum, I'd like to see a 0, that's okay. So that simply would mean that we leave our prices constant, so we do not have any increases. And let's say the maximum value is 1. So 100% would be the maximum value we would increase our prices, at least in this scenario here. And then we could specify an interval, and let's say the interval is 0.05. And then, yes, I would like to add a slicer to the page, and I click OK. And what we get is exactly what we have seen before. We get a little slider here, this one here, which allows us to specify the number itself, which you can see up here. And of course, you can also type in directly. By the way, if you do not like this slider here, there's also an option if you go up here under this little down arrow, here select the type of the slicer. So if you take this, then you can see you can also choose list, drop down, and the other ones. So in my case, I'd like to go with the drop down. So I can select drop down, and then I can see that here I have the options now to select from. Okay, as you can see up there. And that's it. So here you can see that the top level is actually not included. So that is why I would like to go to let's actually adjust this. And let's do it directly, because you see, whenever you create a what if under the modeling, this what if scenario analysis, we know that we also create a table. Because what this actually does this here is simply creating a new table, which you can also do by clicking on new table, and then it uses the generate series function. We can see this if we tick on the table itself, that this is actually here the formula from 0 to 1 and in 0.05 steps. So if I type in here 1.05, so like that, and now I press enter, slightly modify this price change. Now we should actually see, if I go up there one more time, and we should see the 1 included. Okay, so 1 is now included. That's fine, because I would also give here the option to simply, well, double the price. So, okay, so we got our first one, and of course we can make this a little bit smaller because we do not need it that big. Then I can take it here and also format it maybe a little bit. So for the items, for instance, let's make them a bit bigger. So text size to 15 maybe, and also increase the font color to black. So now we can see bigger numbers in here, right? That's totally up to you how you want to format that. Also, the price change itself, maybe also increase the slicer header, maybe slightly to, let's also say 15, and also make it maybe black, which already is here, font color. Okay, so we got this. Now let's actually create another what-if parameter for our demand, because unfortunately, we cannot simply increase the price to, double the price and then expect that the demand would not change. Probably, depending on the product we sell, of course, but probably the demand would shrink a little bit. So let's actually also factor this in. Let's go with the new parameter here, and this parameter will be simply the demand. Increase or decrease, demand change. Let's call it demand change to be consistent here, change. And then the data type itself is also here a decimal number. And then here for the minimum, we set it to 0. Or let's actually say we also have, of course, a negative impact if we increase the prices. So let's say minus 0.5. And the maximum should be, let's say, 0.5. Okay, so maximum, the demand would change 50%. Demand increase because we have launched a new product, or because our competitor defaulted, or any other kind of scenario you can think of. So the increment itself should also be something smaller, and of course, depending on what you think, but let's say also 5%, so 0.05. And yes, I also want to add a slicer to the page. I click OK. and then I will also do the same as I've done here. So we'll adjust it to a drop-down list. And of course, as I said, choose whatever you prefer. In my case, I'm going with a drop-down. And then of course, I'd like to also format this a little bit simple, similar to that one. So I can go to the item section, said, yes, I had 15 here. Also put on black color. And then for the slicer header, also use it black color here, that's okay. And then for the text size also make this 15. And by the way, always remember when you format a theme up front under the view here, customize your theme, then of course you have all the options to format also the visuals. So this could maybe save a little bit of work, so you don't have to do it manually in your reports. So, and then of course we can place it somewhere and also make it, and here the red dotted lines are really helpful to adjust then the size to have the same size as the other one. By the way, you can also see it if you go under general, you also see the X and Y position, the width and the height, so you can also adjust this exactly so you have pixel perfect reports, right? So that's it. For me, that's fine, and now I have here all the other options as well. And finally, of course, I need to, well, somehow implement those two options in my, let's say, my sales numbers, right? So because currently, if I go in here and say, let's actually take a look at maybe the sales, you can either tick the chart first, or you can simply tick the total sales number here, because by default, with numerical values, you already know that we get a bar chart here. So this will be our total sales, the normal sales. However, we also have an adjustment, because now we want to factor in what if the price change, and what does this mean for demand? So that is why I can use my total sales number here, and I can use the same formula, because we basically also do the same. We iterating over the orders table. We have an iterator function, so the first argument is a table itself, in this case our orders table, and then we multiply for each row in the dataset the amount with the selling price. So the only thing we need to do now is implement those two additional, well, scenario, well, in this case, what if parameters we have, right? So our new demand as well as our sales change, or in this case our price change, and we have the selling price here. So I simply take all of this, Control-C to copy it, and then I go into right-click on the measures table and go to new measure, and then I simply say this will be scenario sales is equal to. Now I paste this inside, and of course I can't use the same name here, so I remove this like that, and that's actually fine. So currently, if I would now create this measure, then we would have exactly the same number as we see here, so no changes. But now we would like to actually add our two, well, options we have here, right? So let's say for the orders table, for the amount will change by the scenario. By the way, it doesn't matter if we simply add both of this at the end, or if I add the demand change next to the amount and the price change next to the, well, the price itself, because it's simply a multiplication of all those four measures. So in our case, I'd simply like to multiply this. Let's say multiply the amount times, and then in parentheses 1 plus here now the price, the demand change, right? Demand and exactly the value, like this one. And then we multiply this by the selling price, and here we simply add times, and then also in parentheses 1 plus the price change we have, right? So there it is. From the price change value, which gets created like that. And then of course finally we need of course to close the SUMX function to have our new scenario sales. So by default that should be fine, and the reason why we put in a 1 plus is simply because, remember, here we specified in our scenarios, we specified values between 0 and 1. So what we want, if for instance if you increase the price 100%, of course then we would like to have 1 plus 1. That is why we have this 1 in front. So let's actually press enter. And let's take a look at our scenario sales. So if we make this a little bigger here, the visual, and then also take in our scenario sales. So now currently we have exactly the same value. Why is that? Because the default one, of course, for the price change is 0, right? And also for the demand change is 0. Even though it stands from minus 50% to 50%, the default is 0. So now if you select something, let's say we increase the prices with, let's say 20%. I type in 20% here, and now we can see that here, in this case, the scenario sales are bigger. And by the way, the normal sales are still the same, right? If you hover over it, you can still see 1.35 million. So simply because the visual adjusted, and then it looked like that this value shrinked, but that's not the case. This is exactly the same, but the scenario sales is now adjusting, right? So let's say we would like to increase it at not only 20, but let's say 100%. So we have exactly the double amount of sales. And then we go to our management and they say, well, that's fantastic. Fantastic scenario. But the issue is, if we do it like that and increase our prices 100%, then probably also the demand would change, right? And then you could say, okay, well, if we do this, then we lose 50% of demand. And if you ticked one, then you see we get exactly the same amount of sales, right? So depending on what changes, so if you make it to increase prices, let's say we make it to increase our prices 50%, and we only lose demand, let's say, of 25%, then of course we still are up in our total sales for the year, because our new sales or expected sales would be 1.52 million, not the 1.35 million, right? Simply because we were able to increase our prices 50%, but the demand only shrank 25%. And this is how you can implement those parameters in your calculations. So total sales is just an example. It could be any of your calculations, right? So if you, for instance, think about the cost, you make it to decrease the cost in a specific scenario. You can also implement this and then see how the profit changes in any other ways. And the great thing is that this is totally dynamic. So you create the parameters here, and currently we only have a bar chart. But let's say we'd like to see this, for instance, for each of our categories we have. Then we only need to do is go to an orders table and take a look at our different categories. So if I tick on categories, please make sure that you still have the visual selected. Then you tick on categories, and then you would see this difference for all the categories, right? And the same could be true for all the customer countries or specific customer companies. All this is completely dynamic. So whatever kind of view you choose, now you can see exactly how these scenarios will change. Also across the years or for different months and so on. Totally dynamic. Okay? So that's it for the scenario analysis. It's just an introduction, I know, but hopefully you can use this knowledge now and implement this, of course, after training it and practicing it in your own projects. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.